When I was 17, I thought I knew what pain felt like. I'd scraped my knees on cracked pavement, lost a childhood pet, failed a test that seemed to decide the rest of my life. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for that night. It started like any other Friday. I was coming home from my part-time shift at the diner on Maple Street, my uniform still smelling faintly of grease and cheap coffee. The sun had already set, and the air was thick with the scent of rain that hadn't quite decided to fall yet. I remember humming under my breath, counting the few bills in my pocket, barely enough to cover gas and maybe a sandwich for dinner. I wasn't happy, but I was surviving. And at 17, that felt like enough. When I turned onto our street, I noticed something strange. First, the porch light wasn't on. It was always on. My mum hated coming home to a dark house. A home should look alive, she used to say. I parked out front and stared at the windows. No movement, no light, just silence. Inside, the air was hollow. Every step echoed. The living room furniture was gone, just bare outlines on the carpet where the couch and coffee table had been. My stomach dropped. "Mum, Dad?" I called out. My voice bounced off the walls, but no answer came back. I ran through the house and my sister's room, empty. The master bedroom, stripped bare. The kitchen, spotless, except for a single note on the counter, held down by the salt shaker. "You're better off on your own. Don't look for us." That was it. No signature. No explanation. Just 10 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. I read it again and again, my hands shaking so hard I almost tore the paper. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a second I thought this had to be a prank. Maybe they'd gone somewhere urgent. Maybe there'd been an emergency. I grabbed my phone. My mum's number disconnected. My dad's same. My uncle's voicemail, then silence. I tried the neighbors, but they hadn't seen anything. When I drove to school the next morning, desperate for answers, the secretary told me my parents had requested all records transferred. "Looks like they moved out of state," she said casually, not noticing how my world was collapsing. They hadn't just left me. They'd erased me. For days, I waited. Maybe they'd call. Maybe they'd realize the mistake. But nothing came. Eventually, the power company shut off the lights. The water stopped running. I was 17, standing in an empty house with no money, no family, and no idea what to do next. At first, I refused to believe it. I slept on the living room floor, clutching my phone, waiting for a message. I kept my sister's stuffed bear beside me. The silence was unbearable. I remember screaming into the emptiness, asking what I'd done wrong. But walls don't answer. The first night I spent in my car was the coldest night of my life. The seats felt like ice. I parked behind the diner, wrapping myself in my work jacket. I could see my breath fogging the window as I whispered, "It's fine." "You'll be fine." I wasn't fine. I worked double shifts, washed dishes, mopped floors, anything to keep moving. The pain was fuel. The anger, oxygen. Every time exhaustion tried to pull me under, I pictured that note. Those words, "You're better off on your own." If they wanted me gone, I'd make sure they'd regret it. I moved into a rundown apartment with 2 other kids from work. We shared one mattress, took turns sleeping on it. I used my tips to buy textbooks from the thrift store and studied at night under a flickering bulb. I was done waiting for someone to come back for me. There were nights when I nearly broke. Nights when I stared at the ceiling, wondering if they were laughing somewhere, living in comfort while I scraped by. Sometimes I'd imagine knocking on their door, throwing that note in their faces, and demanding an answer. But then I'd realize that if I did, they'd win. They'd see me as weak. So instead, I chose to disappear from them too. Years passed, and with every job I took, janitor, cashier, line cook, I learned something. How to endure, how to adapt, how to keep going when no one cared. And in that loneliness, something inside me hardened. I stopped wishing for family. I started building something else, an identity, a reason. The world didn't give me kindness, so I decided I'd build power instead. I got into a community college through sheer persistence and scholarships. I studied business, fascinated by how people built empires from nothing. The professors said I had grit. They didn't know it came from abandonment. There's a particular kind of silence you hear when you've been left behind, the kind that follows you even in crowds. I carried it with me everywhere. It whispered every time I doubted myself. It said, they didn't believe in you. But slowly, I learned to answer back. Watch me, by the time I graduated, I had a small savings account and 1,000 ideas. I started a small online store, selling designs I made at night. It failed, then another one failed. But the third one, an app that connected local creators with small businesses, took off. It wasn't luck. It was survival instinct turned strategy. Each success was a wound that closed. Each obstacle was another reminder that I didn't need them. Still, every time I saw a family at a restaurant, laughing over dinner, something twisted inside me. I'd pretend not to care, but I'd always look away too quickly, because no matter how strong I became, there was still that 17-year-old kid in the back of my mind, standing in an empty house, holding that note, and though I didn't know it yet, the people who wrote it weren't gone forever. They were waiting, somewhere out there, to come back into my life, tear open the scar I'd spent 15 years trying to close. They say time heals everything. That's a lie. Time doesn't heal it, hides the wound until something sharp enough cuts it open again. For me, that something was success. By the time I turned 32, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I had my own company, Strive, a digital marketing platform that helped small businesses grow online. I'd started it in a cramped apartment with a borrowed laptop, and now we had offices in 3 cities. It wasn't easy. There were nights I slept under my desk, coding until dawn. I drank too much coffee, skipped too many meals, and carried a kind of quiet rage that burned hotter than any motivation seminar could ever promise. But the thing about building something from pain is once you taste progress, you can't stop. You want more. Every headline, every feature, every client, win it, was like fuel poured onto the fire. I wasn't just proving myself to investors or customers. I was proving myself to the ghosts who had once told me I was better off on my own. And then, one morning, it happened. I was on the cover of Forbes. I stared at that glossy page for a long time. My photo, my name in bold letters. The young founder who built an empire from nothing. They didn't know how right they were. That day, I didn't celebrate. I didn't buy champagne or post on social media. I just sat there in my office, lights dimmed, staring at the city skyline. Because for the first time in 15 years, I realized I had everything I'd ever wanted except peace. The calls started a week later. The first was from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something in me hesitated. When I picked up, I heard a voice I hadn't heard since I was 17, double quotes, ... "It's me," she said, her voice trembling. "It's Mum." I froze. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. Then I heard her sob. "I saw your face in the magazine. You've grown so much. We're so proud of you." Those words, "we're so proud of you," hit me like a blade. I could almost see her in the kitchen again, the one that no longer existed, telling me to wash my hands before dinner. But that memory shattered as quickly as it came. "Proud," I said quietly. "You left me, remember?" There was silence on the other end. Then a weak laugh. "Sweetheart, it was complicated. You wouldn't understand. We were struggling too. I wanted to hang up, but I couldn't. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. You didn't just leave," I said. "You erased me." She started crying harder. "We thought we were doing what was best for you." "Your uncle said." I ended the call. 2 days later, my inbox was full. Emails from my father. From my uncle. Even my sister, grown up now, married, with kids I didn't know existed. They all said the same thing. "Let's reconnect. Let's talk. We've missed you, missed me." As if I'd just gone off to college and forgotten to call. The anger came back like a storm. For nights, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that empty house. That note, that silence. I thought about ignoring them forever. But something inside MIT wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't curiosity, it was something colder. Closure. I needed to look them in the eye and show them who I'd become without them. When my father's email invited me to dinner, I agreed. The address, my uncle's mansion, the same one they'd moved into after selling our house. I still remembered the pictures from years ago: a marble staircase, chandeliers, a fountain in the driveway. I used to imagine them laughing there, while I ate instant noodles in my car. I arrived exactly on time. The gates opened slowly, and the house looked even bigger in person. I parked my car, a black electric coupe, and walked up the steps. My palms were steady. My heartbeat wasn't. When the door opened, my mother stood there. Her hair was grayer, her eyes softer. For a moment, I almost saw the woman who used to tuck me in at night. "You look amazing," she whispered. I nodded. I had to. She stepped aside, and I entered the world they'd chosen over me. The air smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume. My father appeared next, wearing the same kind of confidence I used to envy. "Son," he said, his smile uncertain, "it's been too long." I wanted to laugh. Yeah, 15 years too long. Dinner was served in a dining room big enough for 20 people. They'd set the table with silverware that probably cost more than my first car. My uncle sat at the head, beaming like a man who'd never done anything wrong. As I ate, they talked. Or rather, they tried to talk about family, forgiveness, how proud they were. I listened in silence. Every word felt rehearsed, like a script they'd practiced in the mirror. Then my father said something that made my chest tighten. "You've done well," he said, raising his glass. "We always knew you had potential. We just wanted to push you to make you stronger. Push me." That's what they called abandonment. Now, my fork hit the plate, the sound sharp enough to make them all flinch. "Push me." I repeated. "You left me with nothing. You didn't push me, you threw me away." My uncle cleared his throat, trying to play peacemaker. "You have to understand, It wasn't easy for your parents. They were under pressure. We took them in, helped them start over. I turned to him, my voice low. You took them in. You helped them forget me. He fell silent. My mother reached across the table, tears in her eyes. Please, she whispered, we're still family. That word, family, echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. I looked round the table, the perfect house, the perfect smiles. The people who once decided I wasn't worth keeping. Family, I said slowly, isn't something you abandon when it's inconvenient. They looked at me, faces pale, words stuck in their throats. I stood up. You're right about one thing, I said, lifting my glass. Family is everything, especially the one you build yourself. And with that, I left. Outside, the night air felt clean for the first time in years. I walked to my car, started the engine, and looked back at the mansion. For a moment, I thought I saw my mother in the window, her hand pressed to the glass. But I didn't stop. As the gates closed behind me, something inside me did too. That dinner wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was the funeral of a family that had died 15 years ago, and I was finally ready to bury it. People think the story ends there with me walking away from that mansion and closing the chapter for good. But real life doesn't end in clean lines or satisfying fade-out. The truth is, walking away was just the beginning of another war, one that didn't involve them. But me, because success doesn't erase pain. It just buries it under thicker layers of noise. For weeks after that dinner, I went through the motions, meetings, interviews, contracts, smiles for cameras. Every time someone said how inspiring my journey was, I nodded, thanked them, and moved on. Inside, I felt hollow. The validation I thought I'd feel it wasn't there. One night, I found myself standing in my penthouse, looking out over the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline lit like 1,000 promises. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt the same emptiness I'd felt at 17, staring into an abandoned house. That's when I realized I'd spent 15 years running from my family, but in a way, I'd become them. Obsessed with power, detached from emotion, terrified of losing control. I'd turned their rejection into my religion, and I was worshipping it every single day. The next morning, I did something uncharacteristic. I took the day off. No emails, no staff, no noise. I just drove, no destination in mind. Eventually, I ended up in my old neighborhood. The diner was still there. Faded paint, new owner. The sign up front buzzed faintly, just like it used to. I parked across the street and sat there for a long time, watching people go in and out. I walked inside. The smell of coffee and grilled onions hit me like a time machine. I sat in the same booth I'd used to clean after shifts, my fingers tracing the grooves in the tabletop. A waitress came over. "What can I get you?" I smiled faintly. "Just coffee, black." When she left, I glanced around. Teenagers in uniforms, tired eyes, grease stains on aprons. They were me, once. And suddenly, I felt something shift, a kind of quiet gratitude that I hadn't expected. I had made it out. But that realization didn't bring peace. It brought something else, responsibility. What was the point of surviving the fire if I didn't use it to light the way for someone else? That thought stuck with me. Over the next few months, I began pulling away from the glossy surface of my success. I stopped chasing headlines and started asking myself harder questions. What do you actually want? What do you stand for? The answer came slowly. I founded a new branch under my companion mentorship program for teens aging out of foster care and broken homes. Kids who, like me, had no safety net, no one to call when life fell apart. At first, it was small 10 students, then 20. We provided training, education, a sense of belonging. Watching those kids laugh, argue, build dreams together, it was the first time in years I felt something real. But with that progress came the ghosts again. My family reached out more often. Letters this time, voicemails. They wanted to help with my program, to reconnect through something positive. I didn't reply. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't open either. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't about letting them back in. It was about freeing myself from the need for their apology. One evening, I received a letter not from my parents, but from my sister. The handwriting was careful, almost hesitant. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I was too young to understand what they did, but I remember you. I remember you reading me bedtime stories, walking me to school. I've thought about you every year since. I'm sorry I didn't reach out sooner. I'd like to see you if not for them, then just for me. I read that letter 3 times. My first instinct was to tear it apart. The second was to frame it. In the end, I put it in a drawer, and for weeks I didn't decide. Then one Saturday morning, I woke up before dawn, restless. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at that letter again. Something in me softened, not out of nostalgia, but acceptance. She hadn't abandoned me. She'd been a child, trapped in the same lie. So I wrote back. I didn't promise forgiveness. I didn't offer reconciliation. I simply said, I remember you too. I'm glad you're well. Let's meet somewhere quiet. We met at a park, neutral ground. She looked like Mom, same eyes, same nervous smile, but there was something else in her expression, guilt. Real guilt. We talked for hours. About her life. About mine. About that night. She told me how our parents had justified it, how they'd claimed I was rebellious, a distraction, that moving without me was for stability. She'd believed them. For years, she thought I'd chosen to leave. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just listened. And when she finally broke down, whispering, I'm so sorry, I realized something important. Her apology wasn't what healed me. It was the fact that I could hear it and not feel hate anymore. That's when I knew. I'd already won. The boy who once begged for love in an empty house had become a man who no longer needed it to define him. We hugged before leaving. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't cinematic. But it was enough. A few months later, my program expanded nationwide. I stood on stage at the launch event, looking out at a crowd of faces filled with hope. And I thought about that 17-year-old version of me, the one who thought life was over the night his family disappeared. If I could go back, I'd tell him this: you will hurt, you will break, but you will build something from it that no one can ever take away. You'll build yourself. And as the applause filled the room, I felt the weight lift, not because I'd found closure with them, but because I'd found it with myself. Sometimes family isn't the people who raise you. It's the people who show up when you have nothing left, and the person you become when no one does. And as I stood there under the bright lights, I finally understood what it meant to be better off on your own. They were right, just not in the way they thought.